Hello everyone. I hope you can all hear me and see me well. And welcome to the Gas and Electricity Winter Outlook webinar for 2024 and 2025 winter. We will be waiting 2 minutes more just to have more attendees, and we will be starting straight. I think we are now a good number, and we can start. So welcome again to the Gas and Electricity Winter Outlook. My name is Alexandru Stefanescu. I am the project manager of Seasonal Outlook since January, taking over from Lucas Galdikas. And today we will have the presentations of both the electricity and the gas outlooks from Kacper Żeromski from ENTSOG, the Deputy Director of System Development, and Simon Art, who is the convener of the working group Seasonal Outlook in ENTSO-E. So welcome to both of you. Thank you. Before we start with the presentations, I would just like to give a couple of housekeeping rules. So first of all, the webinar is being recorded right now and will also be published on both websites soon after the meeting. Secondly, you can ask questions directly through Slido. You can either scan the QR code that you see in the center bottom of the slide or enter the code on the top right of the slide into the Slido website. If you enter your name and company details, it will be easier for us to also reach out to you later if we cannot answer your questions. And if we receive many questions, we will take the most relevant by which were most voted. For the agenda for today, we will start with a quick introduction of the outlooks. Then we will go through electricity winter outlook, followed by the gas winter supply outlook. And after these two presentations, we will take questions. And at the end, a small summary. So to introduce the seasonal outlook studies, both of these studies assess the adequate situation to mitigate risks in the security of supply during the winter period, and they are meant as studies to inform all parties about the adequate situation in the electricity and gas systems at a pan-European level. These studies are also done at national level, but these are pan-European studies. And these allow ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G to exchange information about the situation in their respective systems. Without further ado, I will leave the floor to Simon Art to introduce to us the electricity winter outlook. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Alexandru. Good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Art. I work for Swissgrid, that's the Swiss transmission system operator, and convener of the working group Seasonal Outlook, and presenting the results on behalf of ENTSO-E of this electricity winter outlook. I will also answer questions in the end. For some of them, I may rely on Alexandru for certain topics. So, since not all of us may equally be familiar with the seasonal outlook and the similar ENTSO-E assessments, maybe it's good to put it into perspective and to show the different assessments and studies. So the goal of all of them is to help get informed decisions in the various realms. So the TYNDP looks further ahead, more than 10 years. and it covers basically policy decisions, or it informs policy decisions. Then we have the European Resource Adequacy Assessment, which has to do with investment decisions for the time horizon up to 10 years from 1 year ahead. And then we come to the product, to the assessment we talked today about. That's the seasonal outlook that goes into the operational realm, actually. So that's 6 months. And then we have the week ahead, the short-term adequacy, the STA, which is a rolling forecast for 1 week. And of course, the forecast for next Friday is considered to be more robust than the same forecast for the same Friday in 2040. So uncertainty increases with the time horizon. And here we are already in the general scope for the seasonal outlook. So we have the reference scenario based on best available information from the TSOs. And we perform adequacy assessments for 2, let's say, scenarios or 2 variants. One simulation with market-only resources, and the other one is also considering out-of-market resources, which could help in case of ENS then. The adequacy assessment is followed by a critical gas volume analysis, as was also done in the previous winter, and as was started 2 winters ago. And regarding special considerations by stakeholders, there were no regional concerns, especially identified by the TSO for this edition, by the TSOs for this edition. Regarding the Ukraine and Moldova system, we treated this as an integrated part of the European power system, not modeled explicitly, but open for transmission, open for transits. And Ukraine and Moldova expert qualitative comments are integrated in the report as input by them. So the assumptions trend shows a favorable situation. Overall adequacy level is expected to be robust. The gas storages were on 94% on the 1st of October, and thus surpassing the target of 90% set for the 1st of November. So it was already reached early. And we'll see on the next few slides that also the hydro levels and the situation of availability of thermal plants, as well as the demand, show all in all a favorable trend. Let's go first to the thermal plant outage. They are lower than in the winter 22-23, expected to be lower throughout the year, except for March, where they go a little higher. And they are slightly higher than in the last winter, in the winter 23-24, except for in January, where the situation is the same. Now this brings us to the forecast for the planned outage, to the planned outages for nuclear. So in general, European planned outage depicted on the left, of course, correlate with French planned outages depicted on the right. So the scale goes until 25 gigawatt here and until 30 gigawatt here. So we can see, of course, a correlation. And the European planned outages, they are considerably lower than in the winter 22-23 throughout the year, actually. And they are slightly higher than in winter 23-24, especially in February, and where we have a jump here, and towards the end of winter, where they are actually go lower than last year. In terms of the development of the net generating capacities, we can see a comparison for this winter outlook with last winter. So in general, the absolute decrease. So we can see that in general, solar and wind go up. Hard coal goes down, went down, and gas went up a bit, not compensating totally for the decrease in hard coal probably. And in terms of single bidding zones, the absolute decrease in gigawatt is largest for coal in Germany, followed by Poland and Serbia. And the absolute increase in PV and wind is also largest for Germany, followed by Spain. So both have large increase in PV and wind. And Denmark West, the zone DKW1, Denmark West, has an increase in PV wind, also accompanied by an increase in gas capacity. So yeah, the summary is that the renewable energy sources, they go up, and the conventional thermal generation goes down, except for gas. If we look at the hydro storages, we can see that 1st of October 2024, we see 25 terawatt hours more hydro energy available than on the 1st of October 2023. And we see a little less than in 2024. More actual data for 2024 taken out, extracted from the transparency platform, actually show that the situation looked even a little better than in 2023 for the four countries here depicted: France, Switzerland, zones, Italy North, and Norway. So all in all, current hydro storage levels are significantly higher than in 2022 and comparable to last winter. Which brings us to the demand. We see the projected demand 30 terawatt hours lower than last winter. So this means it's roughly a 2% decrease if it materializes, which also adds to an overall favorable outlook regarding the input parameters. And the results confirm that the positive trend identified in the input data. So what we see on the slides is the yellow dots. The size of the yellow dots shows us the expected energy not served relative to the seasonal consumption. So it is a relative size. The accepted energy not supplied is the average for all the simulation. So it's not the median or something, it's the average. And the table in the middle shows the numbers for the average and for the 99th percentile, i.e. that's the 1% worst cases. If we go a little bit through the single zones, we see Cyprus. It may face risks in case of adverse weather conditions combined with unplanned outages. If these adverse weather conditions do not materialize, we do not see a risk. Of course, Cyprus doesn't have interconnection to other power systems, so they rely on themselves. Crete sees minor risks in upcoming winter 24-25. Which maybe it's noteworthy that there will be a new DC connection commissioned with the mainland, will be in operation in 2025, and then thermal units would be decommissioned once this is finalized. So there's a major infrastructural change will go on in Crete. We can go to Finland. The risks in Finland, they are small compared to the seasonal consumptions, but it's indicating that the supply margins in the Finnish system, they may be low at times. Electricity consumers may be affected by a combination of extreme weather conditions and interconnection outages. And Finland is increasingly relying on wind power generation. So during cold and calm days, the reliability of domestic power generation and of the interconnectors is crucial. We see adequacy risks throughout the winter for Ireland, with an expected peak in January. While the generation capacity has increased in the past year, the system still could enter alert state at times, most likely periods of low wind and low interconnector imports. Compared to Ireland, the risk for Northern Ireland is lower. However, situation should be closely monitored, especially for adverse weather conditions. The Maltese system may face risks as of early as 2025. Adequacy in Malta is typically carefully monitored every winter, and Malta implemented specifically designed non-market resources which could be activated in the event of supply scarcity. And we also see minor risk for Poland in the event of unfavorable weather conditions resulting in a very high demand and at the same time a low generation from renewable energy sources technologies. And in scarcity periods, a number of remedial measures can be activated to manage these kind of shortages. So all in all, the results look favorable due to the expansion of renewable energy sources, due to a favorable planned maintenance schedule, and also due to a higher hydro reservoir levels. If we go to the question of how do non-market resources help mitigate these adequacy risks, we can see that the non-market resources, they mitigate the risk in Poland. They do reduce the risk significantly in Finland, in Ireland, and Malta. And as well, when we talk about Ireland, as well, they reduce the risk for Northern Ireland, albeit not as significantly as for Ireland. We can see no changes for Cyprus and Crete by applying non-market resources. This already brings us to the critical gas volume analysis. What we see on the left is the critical gas volume analysis for the winter 23-24, and what we see on the right is the critical gas volume analysis 24-25. We see orange and gray dots here and here. I don't know if you see that if I move over the slide. So the gray and orange dots, they show the historic gas consumption for electricity production for the specific period. And this historic gas consumption for electricity production is driven by basically temperature, but also by changes in the generation fleet, by market prices, by planned outages, among maybe others. The orange line shows the AGC, the average gas consumption for electricity production. And finally, the gray line shows the critical gas volume, CGV, which is the gas needed in order to ensure stability of the electricity system. So this is purely from an energy perspective. It's for a harsh winter. And purely from an energy perspective means like things like system services are not included here. So it could be a little more, but could also be less. But it's for a harsh winter from an energy perspective. And with this last slide, I think I already hand over to my colleague Kasper from ENTSO-G.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm Kasper Jaromski, Deputy Director in System Development Area in ENTSOG, and today I have a pleasure and honor to present you some outcomes of our winter supply outlook with a winter review. And this winter supply outlook, in our case, it contains as well summer overview. So we are trying to look over 1 year period, and this 1 year period, because what is important, and that was proven last 2 years, was that the end of the winter season has an impact on the summer, which then might have effect on some challenges to winter preparedness. So we are running those exercises to be able to assess whether situation is not at the risk of deteriorating, or what are the aspects that need to be then secured, especially. So at the beginning, I would explain few assumptions that we have. So we are running 6-month simulations, and starting point of that is October 1st. So as we saw in the chat, ENTSO-E colleagues published their winter outlook just now. In case of winter outlook, what is important is the state, or the situation in European gas, underground gas storages, and then perspectives for the coming heating season, which starts more or less in October, in some countries later, in some countries sometimes even earlier, but it is a good indication. So we've seen that storage situation in Europe was at a very convenient for the 94 on average percent level, with a little bit lower than expected level in Denmark, but overall situation in Europe was, I would say, was assessed as good and as aimed. So above 90%, this is convenient. To just give you a picture, 90% of filling level in storages would be corresponding to around 100 BCM of gas, billion cubic meters, or what we say here, around 1100 of terawatt hours of gas stored. And as well, to give you an idea, this would be corresponding to kind of 1/3 of winter demand. So this 1/3 of winter demand is usually secured from the storages aside of supplies. This is our seasonal difference in terms of demand. What we are simulating is reference winter. So winter that I would say winter demand that is estimated, forecasted by our TSOs for the coming season, and we as well test situation against cold winter demand, which then would supposed to represent coldest winter covering last 20 years, with, I would say, good representation and quality of data, which in our case would be reference winter around 2009 and 10. But of course, since then, situation evolved, and country per country situation looks different. So we ask our TSOs to review those figures and adjust data when needed. Part of it is a consequence of coal to gas switch. Part of it as well is a consequence of phase out of nuclear power plants in some countries as well, and which role in terms of power generation gas has, but as well in other sectors. So that's our demand side assumptions for the winter outlook simulation. On the supply side, we are still in the situation when Europe is importing some of Russian gas, currently through 2 routes, meaning through Ukraine, and as well another route through Turk Stream, so from south of Europe, southeast of Europe. But in our simulations, in both cases, based on the information provided by Ukrainian TSO, we are not assuming anymore any gas transit through Ukraine to Europe after December. And for that case, we are running 2 sensitivities, so 2 different supply scenarios in this case, one with still some Russian gas coming, but through southern route after December, and another one when there is no single drop of Russian gas, to then test dependence on this supply in Europe. Additional investigation that we run is on LNG side. So together with decrease of the role of Russian gas in European gas supply, We saw increase of importance of LNG, which now is corresponding to the biggest share of supplies to Europe, but because of its nature, it's a different type of source than pipeline gas. And then we run as well low supply scenario, which then supposed to cover and answer questions like we normally are receiving, and I guess it would be probably in this audience as well. What if Europe would not be able to attract enough LNG to replace what is now delivered in form of LNG from Russia? So this scenario was built to secure and be able to answer that question. In our case, this assumption of low LNG supply scenario, it's even a little bit more conservative. So we are assuming some additional troubles, and then this is framed as a low LNG scenario. We have as well reference LNG scenario that's supposed to cover especially recent or last 2 years situation in terms of LNG supply. And to give you as well a flavor of how our simulation looks like, this is a perfect oversight model where we are testing whether European infrastructure allows to cooperate, and with given supply assumptions, given demand assumptions, it is possible to satisfy demand, and if there is enough gas in storages helping to do that. And then if we do not deteriorate situation and I would say Europe would not be forced to use storages in a bigger extent than normally. So in our simulations, countries cooperate to share risk of demand curtailment, to avoid it first, then to share if it is not possible to avoid it, and then inject in optimal way to storages and withdraw, and use the import infrastructure in coordinated way. So we are testing whether infrastructure allows for a cooperation. We are not saying that cooperation is so. We are only able to say whether infrastructure allows for the cooperation, but then it is in the gesture of European countries to cooperate. But if there is no limitation from infrastructure side, that gives a good perspectives. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, the first winter demand profile that we tested is reference winter, and then in this forecasted winter, we see that it is possible to meet demands and keep more than 30% or at least 30% at the end of winter still in storages, which gives very good one hand side starting point for the summer injection period. And if you aim to keep 30% at the end of March, it means that in January and February you have quite a lot of gas in storages. When there is a lot of gas in storages, I would say, or like around 50-60%, your withdraw capacity allows to withdraw gas effectively and quite fast. If of course storage level depletes and storages are more depleted, it is harder to withdraw gas. We can compare it to inflated balloon. So if you release the valve at the beginning, the air is coming out very fast, but then when it's lower, I would say it lowers on the side, it's definitely the pressure is lower there. So then we see that no EU member states would be exposed to risk of demand curtailment, but if there would be no Russian pipeline supply, it is important to secure enough LNG. Here in this case would be LNG as last seasons. And then we see that demand can be satisfied while keeping at a minimum 30% at the end of season, even in case if LNG availability would be decreased. So we are not only testing situation or trying from the perspective of infrastructure, what is the if it's possible to keep 30%, but we as well are testing what would be possible to do with different assumptions, and we see that Europe would still aim at higher level at the end of winter season, and we see that 40% is possible even without Russian pipeline supply anymore. So we see that this dependence decreased, especially if you consider previous seasons. Situation looks a little bit different in case of cold winter, so this very, very, very cold winter situation. And then we see that we see that Europe might need to use underground gas storages more extensively, so sometimes going below desired 30% at the end of season. And to avoid that, it would be maybe a need to introduce some demand side measures, but of course we then say here it can be either introduced or it would be a normal price response based reaction of the market. So of course in the demand structure for natural gas, part of it is industry that then is price gas relevant, or I would say we saw that over the last 2 years, part of the production then stops, or part of the demand is not buying gas if it's expensive. So in this case, either securing additional volumes, measures on the demand side, or using further strategic storage reserves might improve the situation. So strategic storage reserves are not freely available for the market. This is something country per country defined a little bit differently, but there are some restrictions. And then those strategic storage reserves can be triggered in very specific cases. But in our simulation, we are just not using this part of underground gas storages. And it is assumed that, well, if needed, it would improve situation, but it can be used freely. And then in case of combination of very, I would say, severe situation, meaning no pipeline Russian gas supply anymore, and as well situation when deliveries of LNG to Europe would be much lower, then additional supplies from other directions or a different LNG need to be secured, or maybe this 15% decrease in demand would be needed. So to then look closer and maybe more in concrete, what I just mentioned before is that in some cases we see that down from desired 30%, Europe would deplete whatever is available fully for the market. So here we are not talking about strategic storage reserves, we are not touching it. So that's one of the measure. Another measure that is indicated from the simulations in case of combination of those severe cases. So with minimal or no Russian supply, with low LNG, we see that between 90 and 260 additional terawatt hour of gas would be needed, or that would be the size of demand response needed. And if you consider that, additionally 240 terawatt hour of either additional supply or demand side response would be needed to not deplete storages below desired 32%, assuming that some countries have higher strategic storage reserves than 30%. So this is what exactly we see here in conclusions of this slide, is that either it might be a need to either response on the demand side or secure additional supplies at the level of around 30 BCM if still there is some supply from Russia in the southern route from Turk Stream, or if there would be no drop of Russian gas anymore coming to Europe around 45 BCM. On top of this perfect oversight seasonal simulations, we are simulating very harsh winter situation, the peak and 2-week cold spell. So those high demand events that can occur over the winter. And we see that in case of 2-week cold spell, we don't see any additional risk of demand curtailment in any of the simulated cases. In case of no pipeline supply from Russia, Moldova and Ukraine would need to introduce some demand response measures. But when the winter when we consider cold winter and then those event peak and 2-week cold spell, we see that in southeast of Europe, there is a need for demand response at the level of around between 11 to 13% for this one peak day. And then at the same time, we can say that it is something that most likely would be covered by demand side response anyhow. As I mentioned, what we simulate as well is the summer overview. And in this case, we see that even when starting summer with 32%, it would be possible to cover EU demand reaching 90% of gas stock at the end of summer period satisfy the demand and reach storage level desired 90% under the scenario that is reflected in the regulation of the storage targets, where there are some references to 5-year average demand before war, and then whether these demand side measures are introduced. So we collect that. So we run simulations versus that demand profile and as well versus reference demand, where we again ask our TSOs to provide us forecasted demand. And we see that even without Russian pipeline supply, it is possible to inject up to 90%, but maybe with prolonging of the injection in October, or if there would be some demand side response happening there. And then in case of without any pipeline supply from Russia and with LNG low supply scenario, in the case of reference demand, we see that it would be possible to meet 90% target, but then this is the full year simulation that we run. We see that it is possible to just go only to 40%, 39 here, and then it is possible if you not go further down. So even with low LNG, even without any supply from Russia, if the starting point level would be around 40% on average in European storages, it is still possible to inject up to 90% for the beginning of the further, like next winter, which is, I think, first time in history that we see those results. It's thanks to all improvements that happened over the last 2 years, additional infrastructure, and of course, here we are talking about the cooperation happening already. So to conclude, we see that cooperation is a key. Infrastructure is there allowing for the cooperation, but then cooperation need to be secured. So it's possible to avoid risk of demand curtailment. It is possible to inject over the next season, and then in this case situation would not deteriorate. But when we see some combination of very severe situation, we might see a need to use some measures on the demand side, whether policy-based or price-based, or look for additional supply from other directions. And as we always communicate, it is very important to store gas in storages up to adequate level and then not to withdraw it too fast, because when storages are playing their biggest role is the latter part of winter, when it's already January, February, even beginning of March, when storage levels usually depletes. But then when peak day or 2 equal spell happens, it would be even more important to have possibility to withdraw gas fast. And just a very, very last slide from my side. It is winter review slide. I will not talk too much about it. It's more invitation to jump into the report itself. But we see that comparing winter 2022-23 with winter 23-24, the demand was more or less at the same level. And we see that LNG plays the biggest role or satisfy biggest share of gas in Europe for now. So that would be it from my side. And in Q&A session, I'm ready to answer questions, if any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kacper, and thank you, Simon. So now we move forward to the Q&A part of the webinar. For now, I do not see any questions on the Slido. I will give 30 seconds in case anybody wants to ask anything. And maybe I will go back to the screen where we show the Slido code. So I see a question from Risha Krishna Shrestha, sorry for butchering your name, on any details on demand trends across different countries. I guess this refers to electricity demand, although maybe we can also have the perspective of the ENTSO-G. But from the electricity side, you can see, yeah, so power demand, which countries are expecting stronger growth versus which are reducing less. So yeah, at a European level, you see that there we show the trend in the demand, which is slightly decreasing, but relatively comparable in terms of peak demand. We also have data published on the demand for each bidding zone. So you can check in the data released for countries you're interested in. I see a question from John King on Teams. I think this is for ENTSO-G. Was your low supply case both no R gas via UKR and none via Turkstream? So no pipeline gas from Russia. Kasper, maybe you can take this.
Yes, of course. Let me read it again.
Mhm.
So, low supply, I assume it's about low LNG supply, and in this case, we are simulating here only this, I would say, less availability of LNG to Europe. And then we run as well those no Russia or minimum Russia supply. And then there is as well combination of low LNG and minimum and no Russian gas supply. So when you recall the slide, when there was this 8% overall of demand response need in Europe, that was combination of that on top of cold winter. We do that as well, I would say, simulated with the reference winter, but then we were not seeing any risk of demand curtailment. So we have actually two scenarios in terms of two sensitivities in terms of Russian supplies by pipeline. One is still some Turkstream gas coming to Europe, and another one, there is no single drop of Russian gas in Europe.
Thank you for your reply, Kasper. I see another question from an anonymous writer saying, what is your view about Ukraine's impact on the energy flows from Hungary and Romania? So on this question, it's hard to say because it depends, of course, on the situation that Ukraine has and on the situation at the borders. There is for now around 2.1 gigawatts of capacity that the EU has pledged as interconnection to Ukraine, so as support to Ukraine. I'm afraid it's hard to give more detailed information on that. As I see that we have no more questions, I would go forward to the summary of the webinar. And of course, we are reachable at any moment in case you have any other questions. So yes, as you have seen in the two presentations, the seasonal outlook reports provide a pan-European and system-wide analysis of the security of supply in Europe. The adequacy is assessed for the electricity system under various conditions and for gas under extreme events or in case of supply disruptions. The prospects for this year are looking good. They are generally looking better than a year ago. And we both on the gas and electricity side, the TSOs maintain awareness for the coming winter situation and will look at how it continuously evolves. And of course, also the ENTSOs will remain in close proximity and exchange informations when needed. Thank you very much for your attentions. So for any further questions other than the ones we have already answered, you can reach out to myself from ENTSO-E and to ENTSOG Communications at ENTSOG. Thank you very
Alexandro, I
much.
don't know if you'd like to, but
Yes.
there is a last minute question in Slido that I can answer. It's for the gas.
Of course, yes. Go ahead. I did not see it.
So it's the question is, given the forward curve price for winter 25-26 is lower than for summer 25, how will players be incentivized to inject into storage during summer when there is no economic incentive to do so? That's very, I would say, good question in terms that it allows to understand what here we are talking about. So winter demand in Europe for gas cannot be satisfied just from import possibilities. So there is not enough capacity on the at the border of Europe and not enough LNG terminals as well to just rely on supplies without using storages. Storages are needed to be able to satisfy demand in the winter, and they are correspond to quite, I would say, big 1/3 slice of winter demand, which means that suppliers of gas to Europe in Europe are obliged to, of course, fulfill their contractual agreements, and then they need to put part of their portfolio gas in storages. Otherwise, it would be, it might be not possible for them to satisfy the demand. And that is what normally is happening. And of course, country per country situation might differ. And then country per country, there are some obligations, how and how much and who and how gas should be stored. And in some cases, state can even take responsibility of filling gas storages despite the economic incentive or not. So for that, there is an annex in our winter supply outlook describing those country-specific situation. If, of course, it's not, I would say, fully answering the question, I would invite to maybe try to investigate it more country per country. I think there was very good report from Acer last year published explaining at that moment obligations in every country for fulfilling the gas in storages. So one hand side, I think it is still in market interest because suppliers of gas are still obliged to fulfill their obligations over winter season, and they need to store some of the gas in storages. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, I see another question. What are the penalties? And that's as well country per country. So here there is no universal answer here.
Great. Thank you very much, Kacper, for answering these questions as well. And with that, we can close the meeting. And I wish you all a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.